we need to do our part, and we have been very clear that the United States Congress must act. I will say, Andrea, that one point that gives me some level of optimism is we are clear in the knowledge that there is bipartisan support, both in the Senate, which we have seen a demonstration of, and in the House. So let's put this to a vote in the House, and I am certain that it will pass. And so we are working to that end, and we're not giving up. And again, I think all members of Congress and all elected leaders would understand that this is a moment where America has the ability to actually demonstrate through action where we stand on issues like this, which is, do we stand with our friends in the face of extreme brutality or not? And I say we stand with our friends. That's part of who we are and what has allowed us to have the strength that we have globally. America has been a leader on so many issues that are about global security and global prosperity. This is one of those moments of reckoning. And where do we stand? And I have to believe the United States Congress is going to do the right thing.
Do you think that Vladimir Putin has been emboldened by what Donald Trump said about NATO and about Putin?
I mean, the idea that the former president of the United States would say that he, quote, encourages a brutal dictator to invade our allies, and that the United States of America would simply stand by and watch. No previous United States president, regardless of their party, has bowed down to a Russian dictator before. And now we are seeing an example of something I just believe that the American people would never support, which is a United States president, current or former, bowing down with those kinds of words and apparently an intention of conduct to a Russian dictator.
Do you think that Ukraine can survive a year, this year, on the battlefield without American aid?
Ukraine needs our support, and we must give it.
And I'm also hearing here a lot of concern about Gaza, about the Palestinian deaths, support for Israel, but concern that the U.S. should not give more weapons to Israel because they don't think that the Prime Minister is representing the best interests of his country. So
we have been clear. October 7th was a brutal attack, a slaughter of 1,200 innocent people, including young people attending a concert. Women were viciously treated, raped being used as a tool of war. And so we have been clear that we defend Israel's right to defend itself. However, how it does so matters. And that includes what we have seen, which is far too many Palestinians, innocent Palestinian civilians have been killed. What we have seen in terms of the need for Israel to make concrete steps to protect innocent Palestinians. And on the issue of Gaza, I think that there are steps that we need to take now and steps we need to be committed to taking in the future to ensure on the day after this conflict, which we all want to end as soon as possible, that we can work toward a two-state solution.
If Israel ignores the president's urging and yours and goes in on the ground in Rafah before the police people there have gotten the aid and have been placed in some shelter, should we condition the weapons or halt the weapons?
We've not made any decision to do that at this point, but I will tell you that I am very concerned that there are as many as 1.5 million people in Rafah who, for the most part, are people who have been displaced because they fled their homes, thinking they would be in a place of safety. And I'm very concerned about where they would go and what they would do if there were any any
How
concerted
important
attack.
is it to get a hostage deal?
It's critically important to get a hostage deal, and we are working around the clock on that. We have been very adamant that we need to get the hostages out as soon as possible, and working with Qatar, working with others to figure out how we can help make that possible. We've got to get those hostages out.
Thank you so much, Madam.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Andrea. It's good to be with you.